This is the Aprilia RS457, this is the RS660, and this is the RSV4 factory. 3 sports bikes, all from the same manufacturer, and it has to be said, looking pretty similar too. But which one is actually the best one for you, and which one would I buy if it were my own money? Well, today we're here at the Aprilia press garage just outside Silverstone Circuit to take them all for a spin back to back to find out. But before we get started, a massive thanks to DJI for supporting the channel and sponsoring this video. All of the riding footage in this video is shot with their Osmo Action cameras, including their brand new Osmo Action 5 Pro. This new camera is just as small as ever, so it's nice and light on your lid, but inside there's a new sensor, so the image quality is the best it's ever been, and a more efficient chip, which means battery life is hugely improved. Then you've also got bigger OLED screens that I think make it easier and more pleasant to use, and it now supports 2 wireless mics at a time and also has built-in storage and better waterproofing. There are loads of brilliant new features on the Osmo Action 5 Pro, and so do check out the link down in the description below to find out more. So I think we got to start with this one, the 457, and it's brand new for 2024, and basically Aprilia's most recent offering in that mid to small capacity sports bike market. Now it is built out in Asia on their behalf to keep the cost down, but at just over 6.5 grand for a bike that looks like this, you really can't complain that much. Now on top of that, I will say the spec is really quite impressive for the money as well. And although for an A2 compatible bike, you're always going to be capped at about 47 horsepower, one thing I really like about this engine is the fact that it gets a 270-degree crank, as opposed to the 180 in a lot of the bikes in this sort of capacity range that sounds a lot more agricultural. This one, even with the stock system, sounds pretty nice, especially for an A2 bike. Another thing I should point out is the aluminium frame and swing arm. Typically at this sort of price, you're probably going to get steel. So this should be a little lighter, perhaps more rigid, and that lightness is somewhat reflected in the wet weight, which is just 175 kilograms, so easily the lightest of the bunch here. As for the sort of running gear, well, you've got an upside down forecut front, monoshock at the rear, and you do have preload adjustment at both the front and rear, so that might not be something you'll find on other bikes in this market. And the braking is from Bibre, which is Brembo's budget sub-brand, with a single disc up front with a 4-pot radially mounted caliper. Tyres do look a little bit budget, but like I say, considering the rest of the spec and the fact you get a TFT dash and some really nicely laid out switchgear, you know, I don't think you can grumble too much when you consider the price. Anyway, like I say, new for this year, and I haven't had a chance to ride one yet, so I'm really looking forward to getting out on this one. Straight away getting on this bike, you know, it's kind of obvious that they've made it to be easy to get along with. It's 800mm in the seat height, and like I say, pretty light, and so it definitely feels extremely manageable and ultimately, you know, totally appropriate for the A2 market, which it's at least partly targeted to. What I will say though is they haven't sacrificed all sportiness. I mean, you've got the clip-on bars that sit a little above the yoke, so it's not particularly low at the front, but the foot pegs are really quite high compared to most other somewhat beginner friendly bikes that I've ridden. And so you do at least still feel like you are on a sports bike. Lots of power from that front brake, easily enough for this bike. Really light on the clutch. It would have been nice maybe to have an adjustable clutch lever, but the action's super light, so easy to control at like lower speeds and stuff. But yeah, I think the star of the show actually might be this new 457 engine. It's a little peach, nice and usable in this mid-range down at sort of 3, 4, 5,000 RPM. Even in the sport mode, it's not too aggressive, but you can bang it down a couple of gears. It'll rev up to 10.5. And look, it's not going to melt your face in terms of acceleration, but I'm hoping you're getting a bit of the induction sound there, because it does at least sound you know, like an RS660. I was just getting a little bit of brake judder then. I'm going to see if I get that again in a moment when things pick up in terms of the pace. But all round, I'm pretty impressed with how this bike feels. And stuff like the gearbox is nice and precise. You know that the handling is going to be dialed with it being an Aprilia. And even those slightly budget-looking tyres don't feel too bad. But it has helped a bit that it's dried up. I think I've just caught up with somebody on a monkey bike, or at least maybe a Grom, and I'm managing to stick with them, so perhaps that's testament to the performance abilities of the RS457. But yeah, all round, a lovely little bike to ride, certainly on the road anyway. And although I'd like to have one for a little bit longer to properly evaluate, I'm certainly impressed on first impressions. Maybe a little more power would be a good thing in terms of giving you that proper ear-to-ear grin under acceleration. But it's still a really nice sounding engine, nice feel, good performance given the constraints of the capacity and the license compatibility. And I really do feel like the fact that the clutch is light, the gearbox is precise, you know, those little things really do help in terms of how much enjoyment you get out of it. And I did try a couple of, you know, fairly significant decelerations and didn't get that judder again, so maybe it was the road surface or something like that. So who should think about buying this one then? Well, if you're on an A2 license but you want something with true Italian sports bike appeal, you can't really go wrong with it, and there's probably not something else on the market that's gonna scratch that same itch. But I'd also say that the big bike soundtrack, the characterful engine, the super sweet handling, the up-to-date tech, and the RS Family Lux mean that a more experienced rider, perhaps looking for something they can really wring the neck of on the road, or something that's a bit of fun but still affordable, will still be able to have an absolute blast with this bike. Now moving on to the 660, and everything's a little bit more serious about this bike. Like the price, which comes in at around 10.5 grand, although if you do look on the Aprilia website, you'll often see these discounted by about £1,000. Still a decent step up from the 457, and you'll see that reflected in the rest of the specs. Now, despite also having a parallel twin engine with a 270-degree crank, so a similar sound and feel, well, this one, of course, doesn't have the burden of the A2 license limits, and so it makes 100 horsepower peak, which is over double that of the 457. Brakes are proper Brembos, and you get 2 discs up front. The suspension offers more adjustability with the damping, and the riding position is that little bit more aggressive with a seat height of 820mm as opposed to the 800 over there. So your bum is a little bit further up, and that's going to get you over the front and feeling a bit more sporty. Then on the tech front, there's a few more little modes and things, and cruise control, for example, comes as standard. And you've also got an up and down quick shifter, which I think is going to suit the nature of this bike quite nicely. Now, I have ridden this one in the past, thoroughly enjoyed it, probably one of my favorite sports bikes on the market at the moment for the road anyway. And so yeah, equally excited to get out on this one. Immediately, this bike's got a very unfair advantage over the 457, and that's the fact that they fitted the Akropovich carbon accessory silencer. And so, you know, it's not super loud, it's still got the cat in, but yeah, just a bit more bass and depth, which adds to the sensation that you're riding a bike with a bigger engine. Also, I will say maybe quick shifter culture has gone too far, in that you get them on absolutely everything nowadays, including retros and adventure bikes and stuff like that. But I do think it feels at home on a sports bike like this, and it's definitely welcome here, and I sort of missed it a little bit with the 457 not having one. Now, like I say, you haven't got a great view of it, but one thing I do notice jumping on this bike is that the dash is quite a bit smaller, and I guess that's because the 457 is new for 2024, whereas this bike, well, it's been a few years since they properly updated it, and so things have probably moved on a bit in terms of like what size of dash you can get for what sort of money. It just feels a little bit ungenerous in terms of screen space, and so maybe when they next update it, we'll get something a bit bigger.
maybe 100 horsepower doesn't sound like a huge amount on paper, certainly in the grand scheme of things on the sports bike market, but it's definitely enough if you get it right up at the top of the revs there to get it moving pretty quickly. It's only 183 kilograms, maybe 182, this bike, and so it shoves along with no bother at all if you get it up above sort of 7,000. Plus, this engine is derived, I think, from the V4. They say it's effectively like cutting 2 of the cylinders off. And when you do get it singing and revving that bit harder, that's when you maybe get a bit of that sort of sound of that screaming V4. You know what it is I really like about this bike is the fact that normally I would say sports bikes, if they're quick, tend to be uncomfortable. And if they're comfy sports bikes, they tend not to be that quick. But I think this is right in the sweet spot of something I could actually ride every day. And it wouldn't get boring because there's no real compromise on performance. But also I could gladly commute in this riding position. To me, it feels almost as comfortable as the 457, if not exactly the same. You just feel like you're elevated a bit, which I guess gives it a touch more ground clearance. Sorry, I'm going to slow down a bit, otherwise you won't hear a word. Now, what I'm starting to appreciate today is that Aprilia just seem to be able to get the feel of the bike just right. The way the throttle feels, the lightness of the clutch lever, lots of feel on the brakes on this bike. The gearbox feels nice, the quick shifter is super crisp, never misses a beat. And yes, I'm definitely remembering now why I said in my last review of this bike that it's basically middleweight sports bike for the road perfection. Woo!
From those long days out on the bike at the weekend to short quick blasts and even to the occasional track day, I think this bike is a brilliant all-rounder in the middleweight sports segment. Perhaps it's not the wisest move for a brand new rider, but I think for almost everyone else at all different levels of ability, there's a good time to be had. Comfy, quick and stylish, and all for under 10 grand if you can get that Aprilia discount. Well, for me, it doesn't get much better than that.
So look, it's time to take out the proper beast of this lineup. It's the RSV4 1100 factory. And basically you can take pretty much everything about the RS660 and double it. It's pretty much double the price. You got twice as many cylinders with it being a V4 versus a parallel twin. Not far off, double the capacity as well, and it'll make twice as much peak power at over 200 horses. Really what you've got here is a race bike for the road, and so as you'd expect, almost everything about it is top spec. So you've got Pirelli's Super Corsa tyres, you've got Öhlins semi-active electronically adjustable suspension, Brembo style Emma brakes, and more techie settings than you could shake a stick at. Hopefully there's a wet mode. On the road though, is it really twice as good as that bike? Well, I guess there's only one way to find out.
Now, straight away jumping on it, you know, this isn't the commuter's choice or the practical motorcyclist choice. It just feels way more aggressive. And also you're feeling the extra size of it too. It's about 200 kilos, which is still pretty flipping light, but there's some extra width to it, partly because it's just a bigger bike. I guess visually as well with the winglets, you know, you just feel like you're on a bigger machine. But also with this seat up at 845mm, at 5'9", I'm stretching a bit to reach the floor. And I think that's also to do with the width of the saddle to help you hang off it if you're riding on the track. If you've ridden a bike that's around 850mm like an adventure bike where they've intentionally tried to make it narrow, you know, this isn't going to feel the same. It really is really quite wide at the back on the saddle. So much aggression, so much power on tap. It was in user, which I guess you can pick your own settings for the rider rates for that mode. And I don't really know what it was set to, so I've put it in street. Good gracious. You've just got to be a lot more alert when you're riding a bike like this, because everything is that little bit more on edge. You've got handling that flicks so easily. You've got brakes that are
aggressive, there's lots of bite, and so if you just jump on and grab a fistful, it'd lock up easily. The power as well, you can get yourself going at speeds that are just ridiculous, and then corners come up so quickly that you can't afford to switch off for a second. And no doubt it is exhilarating, but it's a really quite different riding experience. One thing that's jumped out at me is that upgrade in quality of the suspension. Of course, this is going to be a firm bike. It's not necessarily very cushy, but still is that bit more composed than the RS660. And I'm sure that only continues and the gap gets greater the more you start to push this bike to its extremes. The sound though, wow. Just phenomenal. And I remember last year we did a video about the best sounding bikes currently on the market. We did it by running a poll with you guys, the audience, and easily, you know, the winner was the RSV4. Probably not with this stock exhaust on, but I think it more than easily justifies the way people voted in that particular poll. Thing is as well, there are other manufacturers that make V4s. The Ducatis, for example, brilliant bikes, but I just don't think they have as good a sound, and they don't do as good a job with the exhaust. I know that manufacturers are very limited as to what they can do now, but that is one side of the Ducati V4s that I have found a little maybe disappointing. There's something very special about riding a bike like this. It's obviously got the looks, the performance. It's definitely got presence. I think if you roll up at a bike meet, you'll get a few looks on this bike. But the question really is like, are you having fun though?
It's exciting, it's a statement piece, it's phenomenal in terms of power and performance, and the sound of the engine alone can instantly make the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. So if you've got the money and you get a kick out of owning something as extreme as this, then I totally understand why you'd get one. And of course, if you're a really talented rider who likes to go to the track, then you'll get to explore a lot more of what this bike really is capable of. Me though, well, I definitely wouldn't put myself in that category, and I would say I have more fun, at least on the road, on the 660. It's sweetly balanced, it's more comfortable too, and ultimately you could buy two of them for the same money.
But as always, I'd love to know which bike you picked, so do let me know down in the comments below. And also, if you want more information on why I love this bike so much, then I'll put my full review from earlier this year on the screen now, so you can give it a click and give it a watch. Do hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle reviews like this right here on MOTOBOB. And massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.